So hey guys, welcome back to another video of networking. So this is Nirbhay Singh, and in this video I'm gonna discuss about what is DNS and how DNS works. So without wasting any time, let's get started. So I will be discussing about DNS in three parts, that is through DNS terminologies, components of DNS, and through DNS working. So let's go to our first part. In this we will see what is DNS and we'll see some important terminologies of DNS that will help us to understand DNS in much easier way. Okay, so first let's see what DNS is and what it says. So it says DNS, domain name system, is like the internet phone book. It translates human readable domain names like example.com into machine readable IP addresses like 192.0.21, allowing computers to locate resources on the internet. So what actually it says? If I take an example, suppose if someone told you like he found a website where some good learning stuffs are being uploaded and its IP address is 192.0.21, and you will say okay, but eventually you will forget this IP address. Okay, so to overcome this and make it more human readable, it can replace this IP by help of a DNS name like example.com, which will redirect to the same server or to the same location through this example.com. Now we'll see what this domain register are. So from the domain register we can actually purchase a domain for ourselves. Different providers are like GoDaddy, AWS Route 53, and many more are there. Okay, now we'll see what these DNS records are. So it is kind of a record which redirect to different kinds of IP or to different kinds of location. Like for A, it will point to IPv4 address. For 4 times A, it will point to IPv6 address. For CNAME, it will point to another domain or some alias. Okay, similarly we have other many types of records. Okay, now for name server, it helps us to resolve DNS query by specifying the authoritative or non-authoritative server for a domain. Okay, basically it helps us to resolve the DNS query for any domain into its specified server location. Okay, so now let's go to our next part, that is component of DNS. In this section we will see different components of a DNS that it can consist of. Okay, so let's take an example of a URL, that is https www.docs.example.com. okay, now we will see like what are the different components included in this URL with the help of this our diagram. Okay, now at the end of this URL we can see a dot is mentioned. Okay, so what is this? So this is basically denotes a root domain for any URL. Okay, so this denotes a root domain for any URL. Now you will be saying like I have not seen this kind of dot at the end of any URL or at the end of any website. So ideally we don't include this. Okay, so if we exclude this also, like it will be added by default, and if we add also then it will not make any difference. Okay, so it will be termed as root domain for any URL. Okay, now we can see we have .com. Okay, so for the second thing, like related to our top level domain, we can see items similar to .com are included here, like .com, .in, .org, .edu, .gov, .net. So this can be termed as top level domain. Okay, now we have example.com. okay, so if I just mark it, now we can see in second level domain the URL will consist of things like example.com or google.com or youtube.com. okay, so as we have example.com, so we can denote it as second level domain. Okay, now further we have docs.example.com. so if we take this and in our diagram if we take an example, it will fall under our subdomain section. Okay, so we will have URL similar to like docs.example.com or api.example.com or any other combination. So it can be termed as subdomain of any URL. Now we have www.docs.example.com. okay, if I take the whole, so in our diagram we can see this kind of URLs are mentioned in FQDN, that is fully qualified domain name. that is www.docs.example.com or www.api.docs.example.com. So in our URL from www.docs.example.com, it can be termed as FUDN. Okay, now if we include this HTTPS also, okay, include this HTTPS, then www.docs.example.com. So this whole can be termed as a URL. So now I have included all the components of a URL that can consist of. Now we will see working of DNS with real life example. So let's go to our next part, that is DNS working. So in this section we will see actual working of DNS with real life example. So you may have already seen this diagram in our previous section. What are root domain, what are top level domain, and what are second level domain. So and these are managed by different authorities. Like for root DNS server, it is managed by ICANN, and for top level DNS server, it is managed by IANA authority, and for second level DNS server, it will be managed by your domain registrar like GoDaddy or AWS. Okay, now if we take a real life example, a web browser is there which wants to access youtube.com, which is hosted on web server youtube.com, which has IP 51.25.15.14. okay, but initially this browser didn't know like this youtube.com was hosted on this web server with this IP. So what it will do, it will make request to its local DNS server, which can be managed by its ISP or by its company or by its organization. Okay, so what this browser is doing, so it is basically doing an DNS query to its local DNS server. Okay, now this DNS query can be of two types, which can be of recursive type as well as of iterative type. Okay, so what happens in recursive type, like this web browser will request to its local DNS server by saying I want to access this youtube.com. If it doesn't have any data or any IP for this youtube.com, it will only say I don't have this, and it will not take load for you to further search for this youtube.com. That will happen in recursive DNS query. Whereas in iterative query, what will happen, if this local DNS server didn't find any IP address for this youtube.com, still it will take the load for you and will try to search the IP for this youtube.com. So how it will go? Now our local DNS server will iteratively make an DNS query to root DNS server by saying, hey, do you know where youtube.com is and what's the IP for it? Now our root DNS server will say like I don't know where the youtube.com is, but I know about .com, which has name server value as 2.3.4.5. okay, so this will go to our local DNS server. Now local DNS server knows that this .com has this name server value. Okay, so this .com comes under TLD. So it will make a request to TLD by saying, hey, do you know where the youtube.com is and what's the IP for it? So now the TLD will say, I don't know the actual IP address for this youtube.com, but I know the name server value for this youtube.com, which is 6.7.8.9. So it will go to our local DNS server. Now our local DNS server knows youtube.com has name server value as 6.7.8.9, and our local DNS server knows that this youtube.com comes under second level domain. Now it will make request to second level domain DNS server by saying, hey, do you know where youtube.com is and what's the IP address for it? Now this second level domain DNS server, which is usually managed by our domain registrar, which can be GoDaddy or AWS.com, where we will have a type record mentioned. Okay, so now this SLD DNS server will say like, hey, I know this youtube.com and it has a record with value 51.25.15.14. okay, so it will pass on to our local DNS server, and now our local DNS server knows the actual IP address for this youtube.com. Now it will cache this IP address for the domain youtube.com, so that in future if someone requests for this domain, it will simply forward this IP address. Now this local DNS server will forward this IP address to our web browser in a iterative way by saying like, hey, this is the IP address for the domain youtube.com, which is 51.25.15.14. So now our local DNS server has done the DNS resolution for the domain youtube.com. Okay, now our web browser has the IP address for that youtube.com, so it will now simply can access this youtube.com with the help of this IP. So this is how the whole DNS works. So if you find this video helpful, do like this video, and for similar kind of video you can subscribe this channel, and if you have any doubts you can simply comment in the comment section. Till now, bye bye.